Okay, we're back from our break where we've been discussing technical kinds of things, like how to download things from the website. And we were just discussing this little genealogy that I made, and the fact that I loaded it on our website and then I couldn't print it out. So we figured out maybe some ways that we might be able to fix it so you can print it out. And one suggestion has been made that you maybe click inside the frame that you want to print out and right-click and select all. So let's all try that and see if it works. And we'll try it. Okay. And we also were having a little bit of discussion about the final exam in here before we pick up our story again. And remember that to check not the calendar that was mailed to you by the distance learning people, but check our syllabus on your website for the date of that final, because it's different than they put on the calendar. Because the reason I changed the date was because it seemed to me that all the distance learning professors were putting their finals on Saturday at the same time. And so I put our final at a different time so that I wouldn't have to give so many makeup exams. Okay, so check on the website, on the calendar, and on the syllabus for the date of the final exam. And I still have to reserve a room for that. So check on the website for the announcement of when and where that will be. Okay. Also I was mentioning that we're going to put some study questions on the WebCT site for the final exam so that they won't just hit you out of the blue. There'll be essay questions that you'll have a chance. We'll give you maybe 10, and you'll have a chance to work up some little short answers that you can later expand when you on the one question you do answer. And we'll probably choose 3 out of the 10. That's my normal way of doing things. Choose 3 out of the 10, and then you will write 1 essay question. The final exam will be a 3-hour exam. It will be a 2-hour exam. I will plan it to be 2 hours long, but you are allowed to take the entire 3 hours if you wish. Okay, so that's the format for the final exam. I thought we'd just tell everybody what we had been discussing during the break. Okay, anything else? Got it all set up? All right, we're working on the website, and we will get it eventually so that everything works on it. All right, let's go back to our Saint Magnus, who has incurred the ire of his cousin Hakon. Hakon was envious of Magnus's popularity and the splendor of Magnus as a saint, of course, and we talked before the break about how, well, he doesn't sound like any Christian saint we've heard of, but he certainly is a person the Vikings would admire, so he fits in quite nicely. And troublemakers are always there among the Vikings. They're so political. They're always maneuvering and manipulating, and so troublemakers come along and sort of make trouble between Hakon and Magnus, and sort of they want to see what's going on. Well, the people of Orkney had their thing on the mainland, and so everybody went to the thing, and so this is the thing is not mentioned very much in the Orkneyinga saga, which is kind of interesting because when we look at Iceland, it's so central to the discussion of Iceland and how Iceland functioned. But nevertheless, there's a thing in every one of the Viking cultures. And it's mentioned here. The saga just doesn't focus on what they're doing at the thing, whereas some of the Iceland sagas do focus on that. But they did have a thing, just like all the other Viking things, and both sides formed up in battle order at the thing where the dispute was going to be settled. The noblemen of the Isles did their best to reconcile Magnus and Hakon, and a meeting was arranged between Hakon and Magnus on Egilsea during Holy Week. Well, here is the sentence taken from the saga describing Magnus. Utterly trusting, honest, and without ambition, Magnus agreed happily. So he's quite innocent, and he's not guileful. He's a guileless kind of guy, which makes him seem kind of like a Christian saint and not like those scheming Vikings. But so Magnus just took everything at face value, and he was very trusting, and he didn't suspect any foul play. Each was to have 2 ships and an equal number of men, and so this was the plan they agreed on, and both of them swore to keep their agreements. Magnus did what was required. On the way to the meeting, a huge wave crashed over Magnus's ship. It was taken as a sign of foreboding that Hakon was dishonest and that Magnus would die. It was like foretelling the future. And that's a typical kind of Christian miracle, by the way. This kind of foretelling the future on a ship is often done that way. The foreboding was right. Hakon was gathering a large force of men, many fully manned warships, and he headed toward Egilsey for the meeting. Magnus arrived first and saw Hakon approaching with 8 ships, and Magnus knew that treachery was afoot. He did not run away, but instead he prayed devoutly and went into hiding with 2 other men. But Hakon found him praying in his little hiding place, and Magnus then knew immediately that Hakon had found him, and he didn't keep hiding. He came right out and said, "Here I am." He was being very open. And at this point, Magnus knew that Hakon wanted to kill him, so he offered Hakon 3 choices. Number 1, Magnus would go on a pilgrimage to Rome or the Holy Land on 2 ships, and there he would do penance for them both and never return to Orkney. So he would sort of exile himself. The second choice Magnus offered Hakon was that Hakon could take Magnus and his 2 men prisoner and send them to Scotland, where they would remain under guard, and Hakon would know that they would be imprisoned there and that they would, be in essence imprisoned and would be safe. The third choice was that Hakon could mutilate Magnus in any way he wanted. He could blind him, for example, and put him in a dungeon for the rest of his life, but let him live. Okay, the point of all these choices are that what Magnus was trying to do was to save Hakon from being a murderer. It wasn't that Magnus wanted to live. He was trying to save Hakon from committing the sin of murder, of murdering him. So he's still a saint. He's a Christian saint in the way he offers these choices. Well, Hakon is sort of bending to them, but all the chieftains then jumped to their feet, saying that they would kill one of the earls and would not live under joint rule anymore. They were tired of the 2 of them fighting and arguing and competing with each other, and so all the chieftains then murdered Saint Magnus. Magnus was murdered on 16 April 1117, and miracles followed immediately. The first thing that happened was that in the rocky, barren field in which Magnus was killed, it suddenly turned into a green and growing meadow, very rich and very verdant, which was taken as a foreshadowing of the paradise, the Eden, that Magnus was being transferred to. Magnus's, and then this there was only that one miracle, but we'll come to some others later. Magnus's mother then went to Hakon and said, "You can kill me, you can mutilate me, you can do anything you want to me, but please let me bury Magnus in the church." And so she was actually the aunt of Hakon, and so they were related together. So Hakon did yield, and he let his mother bury Magnus in Christ Church on the mainland where Earl Thorfinn had built the church. And so he then is buried in the church. And Earl Hakon himself, however, died in bed. He was not murdered and not killed in battle. But there was Magnus in the church, and his relics immediately began performing miracles for everyone. He's the first Christian saint, and so he becomes very famous. Well, the sons then of Earl Hakon, and let's go to our chart again. You can see that pretty well there. Okay, here is Earl Hakon, and then we have his sons, Paul and Harold. then inherited. He had a daughter, and it was her son who later became an earl, but Hakon's sons, Paul and Harold, I'm sorry they all had the same names, but that's what the Vikings did. They inherited jointly and divided the earldom in half. By a kind of miracle, Harold himself died, and then Paul ruled a long time, alone for a long time, and well liked. This is the miracle I read you at the beginning of the class, where it was Harold who put on the beautiful gold embroidered robe that had been meant for Paul alone, and he died of itching and, flesh crawling or whatever the shirt did to him through that magic. And so that was the miracle by which Harold died. Or was it magic? Was it pagan magic, or was it a Christian miracle? When you read the thing, it's kind of hard to tell whether it is magic. It was the editor's opinion that it was an incident of Viking magic. But it appeared to me like some kind of a divine miracle of choosing the one earl who was proper to be the right ruler. And so Paul was a good earl. And you can see that the Orkneys have undergone conversion by this time. There is a bishop of the Orkneys, and he is William, and this is a Norman name. Now, I showed you my book last week, which is St. Anselm and the Handmaidens of God, and I was looking at Anselm and women in that book. But I study Anselm, and Anselm was the Archbishop of Canterbury at this very time. And Anselm made a number of really intriguing statements where he claimed to be the Archbishop of all Britain, and he included Ireland, Scotland, and the Orkneys. Now, we do have evidence in writing where he actually wrote to the kings of Ireland and Scotland claiming to be their archbishop, and that they had to swear obedience to him and get his permission before they did anything or before they assumed their office. And it's very clear that the bishops of Ireland and Scotland were willing to put themselves under Anselm. There's no evidence from the Orkneys, but here we have at the Orkneys this Bishop William turning up, which is very, very interesting because of these constant claims and constant specific singling out of the Orkneys. So it makes me think that there is a connection there with England and the English church, and that it's probably English missionaries, and that this William probably is a Norman, because that is a Norman name. So we have this William, Bishop of the Orkneys, who is not very different from the Vikings anyway. I mean, he's a pretty feisty guy and almost a warrior himself. He had his episcopal seat as bishop at Christ Church, Bearsea, and many miracles resulted there from the saintliness of Earl Magnus. Well, one summer, William went east to Norway, and on his return, the weather deteriorated and the gales raged, and it was almost fall, and it was moving into winter, and the weather got really, really bad, and blizzards blew up, and it was terrifying. So the ship's captain turned to Bishop William and suggested that the bishop might make a vow that if they got a favorable wind, he would not oppose the translation of Magnus's relics. So the implication here is that God was unhappy because Magnus was at Bearsea and God wanted his relics moved someplace else. Okay, so the bishop agreed and made the vow that if God saved them from the terrible storm, he would move and translate Magnus's relics to another place. Well, immediately the weather improved and a favorable wind blew up and blew them straight to the Orkneys. But when he got there, Earl Paul opposed the sanctification of Magnus, and you can kind of see why. Because Magnus might sort of undermine his authority as Earl. So one day, Bishop William didn't. He didn't carry out his vow. And so one day Bishop William was praying alone in Christ Church, Bearsea, and suddenly he was struck blind. And so he was seized with terror, and he knew in his heart that it was because he had not carried out his vow and he had not translated the relics. So he vowed again to translate Magnus's relics, and instantly his sight returned. Okay, a clear sign from God that this is what he wanted done. So William gathered all the leading men of the Orkneys, and they opened Magnus's grave, okay? And when they started to dig the grave up, they found it had sort of wiggled and squirmed, and it had almost risen up from the soil already because it wanted to be open. Magnus, and then they opened the grave, and it's almost like an exaggerated saint's life story. They find the bones and they wash them clean, and they're gleaming and shining, and they look like precious ivory. And then they try to burn one in the fire, and it won't burn. It's magical, and it won't catch fire and burn. Instead, it turns into something golden, almost like gold. And so you can see that this is a true saint, and that's how you know you have a true saint, when you can do these kinds of things with their bones and their relics. So they enshrined his shining bones there above the altar, and they probably enshrined it in some kind of a reliquary, and my guess it would be something like this reliquary, which I have shown you before. This I think is a kind of simple wooden one, but maybe this might be gold, the figures of the saints they have on the side. But here it has these Viking kinds of, almost like the prows of ships, that are like gargoyles that are guarding against the evil spirits here in this reliquary, which is kind of a neat one, and a cross on top, of course. Or it might have been a more elaborate reliquary. I'm sorry, this one is a little bit blurry. I'm not an expert photographer yet. It's not too bad though. And here we see like saints, and here is a king in this reliquary. It looks like there's a king on this reliquary along with the saints. And if you look down here on the side, here's a king, and here are some horsemen or warriors. And so you might almost think, this is kind of like what they would have done for Saint Magnus, because he was more of a model secular ruler, or maybe as much as he was a Christian saint. So his reliquary might have looked something like that. Well, the day of his translation and the day of his death were to be celebrated by law. They were then declared great holidays. And a farmer had a dream that Saint Magnus told him Magnus wanted to go to Kirkwall. And so this farmer had this dream, but he sort of shrugged it off and thought, oh, that was just a silly dream, and I won't go tell the bishop about it. But then he had a second dream, and this time St. Magnus was very angry and visited him a second time and said, why haven't you gone to the bishop and told him I want to move to Kirkwall? And so he did. The farmer went, and once Earl Paul found out about these dreams and these foretellings of the future and these miracles, he finally consented, deeply embarrassed, or maybe deeply embarrassed. I don't know. It's kind of hard to read the saga at that point, because it actually says he kind of turned beet red. Okay, we turn beet red when we're embarrassed, or maybe when we're really angry, and so it could have been either one of those. The saga doesn't tell us why he turned so red, but he might have been embarrassed because he didn't consent earlier, or he might have been just really angry because the bishop confronted him in public with this story from the farmer that Magnus was demanding to be transferred to Kirkwall. So Bishop William then led a grand procession east to Kirkwall, taking the holy relics in a grand procession, and the relics were enshrined in the church there. And then we have 3 or 4 pages, and there are 30 or 40 miracles where people then come to the shrine and they touch it, or they touch the reliquary or the bones. And most of the miracles are the curing of the sick. The curing of illnesses, the curing of cripples, that kind of Christian miracles that have to do with the curing of the sick. Well, now we have this whole business of, once the Orkneys have a saint and they are clearly installing Christianity as a part of it, then the scene shifts to the story of Kalle Colson, who is the nephew of Saint Magnus. And now let's look at our genealogy once again. We've got Saint Magnus here, and he had a sister, Gunhilda, and she had a son, Ragnvald Kali, and this is Kali Kolson, who was later called Ragnvald Kali. Okay, the nephew of Saint Magnus, and he becomes the next earl. Kali Kolson was a nephew of Saint Magnus, and interestingly, he could read and write. And let me read you that poem real quickly, because it's so interesting that by this time, it looks like all the people in the Orkneys have learned to be able to read and write. He had stayed on at his estates in Agder and didn't go back to Orkney. He was a man of exceptional intelligence. This was Cole. Was a man of exceptional intelligence, and his son Kali grew up there showing great promise. Kali was of average height, well proportioned and strong-limbed, had light chestnut hair. He was very popular and a man of more than average ability. He made this verse: "At 9 skills I challenge, a champion at chess, runes I rarely spoil, I read books and write, I'm skilled at skiing and shooting and sculling and more. I've mastered music and verse." But what I immediately leaped on was, I read books and write. So with Christianity, of course, comes the skill of reading and writing. And runes are not suitable for literature, but Latin is. And even if you use the Latin alphabet to write Anglo-Saxon, or you write in Old Norse. And so here we have an educated man. And he went with merchants to England at the age of 15, and so he could already read and write at the age of 15. At Grimsby, there was a large gathering of the people from Orkneys, Scotland, and the Hebrides, and Kali went to Bergen, and this would have been in Sweden. Later, he went to Trondheim in Norway as a merchant. So he was a merchant who traveled all around the Scandinavian world. He was something of a dandy, stylishly dressed now that he was back from England. And England was famous for its dandies, famous for men who wore their hair long, which the bishops frowned on because Christian men were supposed to wear their hair short. And the real dandies wore sort of effeminate clothes and sleeves that covered their hands that hung down, and they also wore shoes that had curly toes that curled up in the sort of back, and so those were regarded as not very Christian. And so here is Kali, the nephew of Saint Magnus, coming back from England and his merchant travels as an English dandy, stylishly dressed. He was appointed joint earl by King Sigurd, and he was given the name now of Ragnvald Kali, because Ragnvald is that traditional name that the earls have had from the very beginning. Well, this Ragnvald Kali made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem accompanied by many men and Bishop William. And he is the one I mentioned at the beginning who stopped in Narbonne, where he met the beautiful Queen Ermengarde. Okay, I want to read you just a little bit of this story of Ermengarde, not too much, but just to give you a feeling for the kind of courtly romance that's now creeping into the culture. They sailed south beyond England and over to France, and there's nothing to tell of their travels until they reached a seaport called Narbonne. And I'm going to turn to the map now, and so you can see on the map where they sailed beyond England. Okay, he would have gone this way maybe, or he could have gone this way to sail beyond England to Narbonne, and he would have come into Narbonne this way on the coast of France. And the news there was that the earl in charge of the town, a man called Germanus, had died and left a beautiful young daughter, Ermengarde, who had now taken over her inheritance and was looking after it with the help of her kinsmen, all very noble men. They persuaded the queen to invite Earl Ragnvald to a splendid banquet, saying that if she were to welcome men of such high rank, traveling from such distant lands, it would add to her reputation far and wide. The queen told them to see to the arrangements, and as soon as the decision had been made, Envoys were sent to the earl, inviting him to the feast with as many companions as he wished. The earl thanked her with pleasure and chose all his best men to go with him. There was lavish entertainment at the feast, and nothing that might be done in his honor was denied the earl. The earl was sitting feasting one day when the queen came into the hall, escorted by a group of ladies and carrying a serving bowl of gold. She was in her finest clothes, with her hair falling loose as is customary with virgins, and a golden tiara upon her forehead. She served the earl while her companions began to entertain them with music. The earl took her hand along with the bowl and sat her on his knee, and for the rest of the day they had a great deal to say to one another. Then the earl made a verse. I'll swear, clever sweetheart, you're a slender delight to grasp and to cuddle, my golden-locked girl. Ravenous the hawk, crimson-clawed, flesh-crammed, but now heavily hangs the silken hair. Okay, the earl had a long stay and the best of hospitality, and the people of the town tried to persuade him to settle down there, hinting strongly that he could have the lady in marriage. The earl answered that he wanted to complete the journey as planned, but promised to call in on his way back when they could work things out as they wished. Okay, now the earl set out for his journey, and they sailed around Thrasnus with a good wind, and the earl made this verse. In the earl's ear the words of Ermengarde will echo, enjoining us to journey by water to Jordan. But when the sea riders race back from the river as we navigate northward, we'll call at Narbonne. Okay, sadly, he didn't do it, but he goes along and he is leaving Narbonne. He's been in Narbonne, and then he goes and sails around Spain and comes in here through the Straits of Gibraltar, and it makes it really clear that he goes through the Straits of Gibraltar. Before he left, though, I might want to go back. Let's see. Oh no, they came to Galicia in the west. Okay, Galicia must have been in the north of Spain. I want to go back to the north of Spain, and there they heard of a man named Godfrey, who had a castle, perched high on a mountaintop that was then ravaging everybody around, and everybody thought of him as a kind of tyrant. And so let's go back to this, and Galicia has to be in the north of Spain, in this Celtic area of Spain, is my guess that would be where it would have been. Okay, so he then expelled Godfrey, the chief of that castle, from the castle and burned it to the ground, singing all the while of Ermengarde. So everything he did from that point on, he was singing about Ermengarde. And so here is, let's see if I got here is perhaps what that castle might have looked like. This is a castle from the period of this time, and it could have looked very much like this. He then, after he expelled Godfrey, Godfrey, by the way, is a name that could be Norman or it could be French, or it could be Viking. I mean, it's kind of a northern name that is where the Vikings were. Okay, now he sailed west to Spain, looting all over the pagan areas, which must have been Spain. So he was looting throughout Spain and winning plunder, singing always of Ermengarde. And here we have, as he comes into Spain, he's singing of Ermengarde. Okay. When they were all prepared for the assault, as they were looting and ravaging everywhere, the earl made this verse. Most admired of maidens, gold-decked at our meeting, Ermengarde the exquisite once offered me her wine, and now fiercely we bear fire up to the fortress, assault the stronghold, and unsheath sword thrust. So he is attacking ferociously with iron and fire, hurling a shower of missiles into the fortress, this being the only way they could assault it. And you have a really interesting insight into the war tactics at this time, because the people in the castle, to protect themselves from the missile, poured down burning sulfur and pitch on the Vikings who were attacking the castle. But eventually, as as the Earl had foreseen, the ramparts started crumbling before the fire, leaving huge gaps where the mortar failed to hold. Okay, it's a little more complicated than this, but then it goes on. Okay, they stayed only a short while after that in Galicia, and then sailed west of Spain, looting all the pagan areas and winning a great deal of plunder. They then sailed along the coast of Spain through the Straits of Gibraltar to Marseille, and then on to Sardinia, where they had a fierce battle with a Saracen ship, and they actually captured the Saracen ship and burned it, and they killed almost everybody, but they took some people captive. Then they sailed south to the land of the Saracens and released the prisoners they had and sailed on to Crete. One of the Saracens was their chieftain, but he had been in disguise, and he sort of praised them for letting him live, and then didn't attack them when he could have. So then he sailed on to Crete and made for the Holy Land, landed at Acre, and stayed until a disease hit them. And then they left Acre and went on to Jerusalem, where they bathed in the River Jordan. And so we can sort of trace their route. They have sailed through the Straits of Gibraltar, and then they go up here to Marseille, which is right here on the coast of France, and then around to Sardinia. This is Sardinia down here. And then they sail down to the Muslim lands, which could have been probably not Sicily, but rather it would have been North Africa here in this area. And then finally they sail to Crete, which is here, and then across to the Holy Land, and they actually reach Jerusalem. They bathe in the Jordan River, and then they set out north, and they go across Asia Minor, and they go to Constantinople. So at some point, they either lost or gave up their ships, because now they make the journey home. They sail to Durazzo, which would be right over here is Durazzo, and then they sail, then they go overland up back to Scandinavia. They went on to Constantinople, where they were greeted by the emperor and the Varangians, and of course the Varangians were the Vikings who were mercenaries who guarded the city of Constantinople. Then they went to Durazzo in Bulgaria, then across the sea, across the sea to Puglia. Okay, this is an interesting thing, to Puglia. They go across the sea from Durazzo. Here's Durazzo here. It's not here, it's here. And they go across the sea to Puglia. That's got to be Apulia. And at that time, the Normans are ruling in southern Italy. And by that time, they have already conquered Sicily. And so they have a kingdom that comprises southern Italy up to the Papal States and all of Sicily. And so at Apulia, and I think it's Apulia. Don't you think it is? Yeah, I think it is Apulia. And the Normans there give them horses, and that's when they start to go overland. And so they're making contact with the Normans, who people usually think the Normans are not Vikings anymore, but here are these guys from Scandinavia. They go and they're welcomed, and they get horses, and they rode on to Rome. They followed the pilgrim route up to Denmark, and isn't that interesting that there is a pilgrim route, a designated pilgrim route from Rome to Denmark? Okay, we don't know where it is and which way it was, but here they're saying in the saga that there was a pilgrim route. In Hordaland, which would have been in Norway, they learned all the news from Orkney, where civil war had broken out as usual and was reigning in Orkney. And so when he got there, who are we talking about now? Kali. Okay, great. Thank you. I get them mixed up too. Okay, Ragnvald Kali then had ships built in Norway, and he returned to the Orkneys. He didn't immediately. It's a longer story than that, but he goes back to the Orkneys. He has to kind of sneak in, and after many battles and much negotiation, he regained control. But he still made many enemies as he was subduing all of the rivals for the throne. Because as you look, when you look at our family tree here, and you look at our genealogy, By this time, practically everybody in the Orkneys is descended from Earl Ragnvald, the first family, and Sigurd the Powerful, who were the first two of this line. And they have so many descendants that now there are scores and scores of people who rival each other for the earldom of Orkney, who want to be the earl. And so there's just terrible battles going on at this time. And so there were many enemies, and Ragnvald Kali was assassinated. And the patterns continued. A strong earl dies, his sons all inherit jointly, and they fight and they go to war. And one wins out and conquers more land, goes a Viking and exploring and traveling. He then is challenged by more rivals, and then civil wars erupt, and a strong earl emerges. And so you see this kind of repetition that over and over again, these patterns have been formed, and they get worse and worse as time goes by because there are more rivals to the earldom, more family members. And this is a mirror image of exactly what was going on in Scandinavia. Okay. I have focused here on the inheritance of the Orkneys, but the Orkneyinga saga is even richer than this because there's a lot more in it about the conquest of Scotland. And not only the conquest of Scotland, but also of Ireland, and in the end, most of England. Okay, so here is the Viking world in which they operated, and it was a world that was completely connected together. They're all sailing. We already just saw Ragnvald Kali, who was leaving the Orkneys and going all the way to the Mediterranean and then back to Norway and traveling to the Orkneys from there. And so this is an integrated world where everybody is connected with each other. This is the Ragnvald who also went to Russia, by the way. And he traveled all over Russia, which we'll see in a moment. Okay, how about Ireland and Scotland? In 790, we will go back in time to 795 when there were the first raids on Ireland and Scotland, and these were the Norwegians who first set out to raid Ireland and Scotland, because remember, the Danes were going down the rivers of Europe. Now, Ireland was organized by the Irish Church, and the Irish Church was vastly different from the church on the continent. The Irish Church was organized according to monasteries, not according to bishoprics. And one reason for that was because there were no cities in Ireland, no cities at all. And all the trade was organized around the monasteries. The bishops were based at the monasteries. You had monastic churches, not episcopal churches for the bishops. Everything was organized around the monastery. This was different, far different from the continent. In Scotland, there was nothing. It wasn't Christian. There weren't any cities there either. There weren't even any monasteries there. The Orkneys, there was no church there. England was organized on the Roman model, where the bishops were based in cities, because there were cities in England before the Vikings came. But the truth is that the Irish Church was far different, and what happened was the Vikings were the ones who founded all the cities of Ireland. There were no cities in Ireland before the Vikings came. There were, however, 5 high kings and many, many sub-kings under each of the 5 high kings. And so Ireland really resembled early Scandinavia in that there were local rulers of each place, and there was no central power, and it was really subdivided into local rulerships in all the different areas of Ireland. So it quite resembled Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, except that there were no cities. And even Norway, Sweden, and Denmark had some trading cities. Well, in 795, we have the first Norwegian raid, and it was on Lambay in Ireland. And in 820, the writer of the Ulster Annals reported, "The seas spewed forth floods of foreigners over Erin, so that no haven, no landing place, no stronghold, no fort, no castle might be found, but it was submerged by waves of Vikings and pirates." So we have this hordes of Vikings pouring over Ireland, getting ready to conquer it. And here is the location of Lambay, where the first raid was made in 795. And from that time on, the Vikings were going to inundate. They were Norwegians, and so they were coming via the Orkneys up here and via the Hebrides. And remember, they conquered all these islands down here, eventually down the coast of Scotland, the Western Isles, and they attacked Lambay in 795. Okay, and here is the area of, did I skip something? Let's see. Okay, here is Ulster. I was looking at the Ulster Annals. Here is Ulster, where Lambay was located. Here are the Orkneys, where they were first, and they went to the Hebrides and down the Isles and to Ireland, where they started attacking down that way. And here are the routes that the Vikings took. They founded all the cities eventually, and they haven't been founded yet because they just went to Lambay, which is a location, but these are the cities they founded. The chief one was Dublin, and they conquered Dublin first, and from Dublin they founded all these other cities, and I put the chief ones on here: Wexford, Waterford, and Cork along the coast. Carlingford is up here someplace. Armagh is here in the north, and they went down these rivers, and then they went overland and in the land, and Limerick is here because there's a major river going in here to found Limerick, and they went up here to Connaught and down the rivers. Here's the Shannon, and so this way they penetrated all of Ireland. Why? Because the monasteries were all based in the interior, and they were full of gold and silver and wealth. And so the first thing they did, they founded those cities. Those were their ports of entry. Those were their bases where they wintered over in order to loot all the monasteries in the interior of Ireland, because that's where the monasteries were. Scotland, on the other hand, was divided between four essentially racial groups: the Picts of the Highland, the Scots of Dalriada, and the Bretons of Strathclyde, the Anglo-Saxons of Northumbria. In the 830s, raiding increased, and it increased along the coast of Scotland and also in Ireland. From 839 to 845, Turgus, the Norwegian, arrived in Ulster from Norway, and nothing would ever be the same again. By 840, there were permanent settlement, and here we see the founding of such cities as Dublin, Armagh, Waterford, Wexford, Cork, and Limerick. Turgus of Norway arrived and assumed overlordship of all the foreigners of Ireland, and civil wars were going on between the Irish kings, and so the Vikings turned that to their advantage. They saw the Irish fighting among themselves, so that Turgus spread out and captured them one at a time, and these are all the cities he founded: Armagh and Annagassan, Dublin, Wexford, Waterford, Cork, and Limerick, as we've mentioned before. He also sacked the monasteries of Clonmacnoise and Clonfert and dispersed the monks. And interestingly, the Irish joined him, and they converted to Thor. So you can see what firm Christians they were, but the Vikings looked like the wave of the future to them, and so they converted to Thor, and these Irish were called the Foreign Gaels, and they actually desecrated the holy place. And in fact, Turgus' wife Aud chanted spells on the Christian altars. But the tide turned against them, and it seemed like the Christian God was really against them, because in 845, Turgus was taken prisoner by Mael Seclam, king of Meath, and he was drowned. And so the Norwegians were now defeated. Okay, let's look at our map of, I hope this one shows up. Yeah, it shows up pretty well. Okay, here they are coming in to Dublin, and all these cities are being founded. And then here is another city, Annagassan is founded, and here are the monasteries which are in the interior, Clonfert and Clonmacnoise, and it's up here. Meath is right here, where the kingdom of Meath is, and then he's defeated right up in here, where the defeat actually takes place of Thorgils. Okay, and here I thought you might be interested in seeing this little map of Waterford Harbor. That doesn't it look like a typical Viking place to you, like the perfect place where the Vikings would found a city? Here is the city of Waterford right here, and to get there you have to sail in this bay. It looks like a fjord, doesn't it? You have to sail in here and go up here, and so it's a very wide and huge river, but very protected place, a perfect place to make as a base for your raiding. So I thought this was pretty interesting. These, I think, are all churches, but this is a modern map, so we don't know what they are. But that's what. And here is a ruined monastery. This is actually Whitby in England, but probably the Irish monasteries might have looked something like this when the Vikings got through with them. Turning back to Scotland, in 844, the Scots overran the Picts in Scotland. The Picts actually came from Ireland and settled in the Highlands of Scotland. And in 840 to 880, Kettle Flatnose rules the Hebrides. In 850, the Danes overran Carlingford and Norwegian Dublin, and so the Danes now are attacking the Norse in Dublin. By this time, all the Norse, this is almost 100 years, the raids have been going on, and by this time all the Norse had intermarried with the local Irish, and so they're Norse-Irish, and now the Danes, fresh Scandinavians are coming. They overrun Carlingford, Norwegian Dublin, and the Danes conquer Dublin in 851. In 852, the Norse attacked the Danish fleet at Carlingford in Ireland, and Saint Patrick, interestingly, was living in Ireland at that very time, and he favored the Danes and was rewarded. And so the Danes slaughtered the Norse for 3 solid days with Saint Patrick at their side, blessing them. And so Saint Patrick is a surprising Christian as well, isn't he? In 853, the Norwegians Olaf and Ivar attack Dublin, and Olaf the White reconquers it. Olaf and Ivar are both the sons of the kings of Norway, and so we see them as king's sons coming to make their fortune and conquer in Dublin, and where they find many shifting alliances, petty war going on, and harrying. And so from 856 to 871, Olaf the White rules the kingdom of Dublin. Now at this point I want to mention something else to you. On your website I have entered yet another little category. We have the genealogies category. There is a category called chronologies, and you notice that I have with this list, I had made a list of dates and shown you what happened year by year. Okay, I have entered the first of your chronologies on the website, and you can now download it. I tested that one. You can download it. It's a chronology of the British Isles, and you may want to go and enter some of these dates for the lectures in it. And there I've done year by year everything that we've looked at for the Orkneys and Ireland and Scotland and England as well, so that you can track the whole Viking attack through that timeline. Okay, so now we see Scotland being overrun, and this is the area of Caithness that, of course, the Vikings control. They also control all of these islands, the Western Islands, which we've seen were granted by King Malcolm, and there were about 5 or 6 King Malcolms, by the way. Malcolm was a popular name, and we don't know which Malcolm they're speaking of in the Orkneyinga saga, but all these Western Isles have been granted to the Vikings by King Malcolm. The Highland Picts are in this area, and the Scots are in this area, and they have now come this way to overrun the Highland Picts. And so, great pickings for the Vikings. When the people who live there are fighting among themselves, the Vikings can step in and take over. And then we have the Anglo-Saxons are down in here, and what was the other group I mentioned? It was a fourth group. The Britons, okay, those would be the Welsh, which would be in Strathclyde, the Strathclyde Welsh right, thanks. And those would be the Britons in Scotland. Here is the area of Meath, which I had mentioned before. Here is Carlingford up here, and here is where Turgis was killed, right here by Mael. Okay. Ivar was also ruling, and so we had Olaf the White ruling in Dublin, and actually Ivar ruling the earldom of Limerick, which is right over here, and here is Limerick. And of course this is the area where you have this wonderful fjord with the river Shannon coming in, which is an ideal Viking trading post there in the kingdom of Limerick. In 860, Waterford was founded, and in 865 to 870, there were expeditions against the Picts and the Strathclyde Welsh in Scotland. So they were coming at them from all angles. The Irish were attacking Scotland from Ireland. The Western Isles, the Vikings in the Western Isles were attacking from that direction, and from the Orkneys, they were attacking to the south. So the Scotland really was never completely conquered. I mean, they were always fighting over it, but it really was at their mercy. In the 870s, the Dublin-York trade route was secured, and that was very important because the Vikings had settled in York in England. And in 871, Ivar, Lord of Limerick, succeeded Olaf as Rex Nordmanorum Totius Hibernii et Britanniae. And last time we translated that as King of the Northmen, of all Hibernia, of all Ireland and Britain. So the Dublin kingdom had authority over the Irish Norse in the northwest England in the area of York. And they quarreled with neighboring Danes in Deira. And so they're creeping down into England and they're attacking virtually everything. From 874 to 914 was the so-called 40 years rest, but the Vikings were still pretty active. So here is the kingdom of Dublin, which is roughly this whole area right in here. And borders, I mean, it's very hard to draw these borders. We just have to look at that area. That's where the kingdom of Dublin was. Here is the kingdom of York, and this is pretty well more defined. So the Vikings had settled in York, they had conquered it, and then you had a trade route between these two. And then with Ivar and Olaf, they're both ruling the same kingdoms. It's a joint kingdom of Dublin and York, and it's all connected by these trade routes. And then Deira is right down here, and so they're in the process of incorporating it. They're creeping down into England, and this is quite amazing. And here we can see more of we can see all of these areas. Here is we don't have Dublin on this map, but we do have York. York is right here. I'm just going to point to it instead of writing on it, but York is right here. And we can see Scotland a little better here. The Norwegian Jarls are up here in Caithness. The Picts are in the Highlands here and here. The North Picts and the South Picts, the Scots are here, and they overrun these Picts here. The Strathclyde Welsh are here, and the Angles and Saxons are here, but now they're being conquered by the Vikings who are coming in to York, up the River Tees here, and up the other rivers, the River Tees, and I think that's how they reach York, that way. And then they're including Deira. Here's Deira right here. So they're creeping down into England. This is labeled Northumbria. That's almost the wrong label to give it, but the Vikings are virtually in control of all of this area, and England is being limited far more. We're going to talk about the conquest of England later. But in 877, Halfdan, the Danish lord of Deira, attacks Dublin, but Halfdan dies, and thereafter there's a falling off of Norse migration to Ireland and an increase in Norse migration to Iceland. By this time, we're not going to go through all the steps now, but by this time the Danes have literally conquered all of England. And it's only with Alfred the Great that England is revived and saved. Alfred saves England, but that's a story we'll look at another time. And once Alfred becomes active, Ireland then grew quieter and more Irish, and there's more and more intermarriage. And finally, in 902, the Irish king Cerbhal of Leinster seized Dublin. Meanwhile, the Norse in the Orkneys started to expand southward into Caithness. And let's see the story of that. We're going back to the Orkney-Yinga saga, and this is quite early in the saga. Let's see, page 35. Okay. Scully, and let's look here at our map. We're going back to this time of the brothers who are the descendants of Thorfinn Skullsplitter. And this is Scully, Lot's brother, that we're looking at here, traveled across to Scotland, where he was given the title of Earl by the King of Scots. Then he went north to Caithness to gather an army. Okay, Caithness is north of Scotland, and Caithness is not Scotland, it's part of the Orkneys. He went to Caithness to gather an army, and from there he sailed back to Orkney to claim the earldom from his brother. Lot gathered an army too, and set out with a large force to confront Scully. When they met, Scully insisted on making a fight of it, but after a fierce battle, Lot won the victory, and Scully fled, first to Caithness and then south to Scotland. Lot went after him and spent some time in Caithness, adding to his army. Later, Scully rode back north with a large following supplied by the King of Scots and Earl Macbeth, and the brothers met in the dales of Caithness. The battle was hard fought, with the Scots attacking fiercely in the early stages, but when Lot urged his men to fight and stand firm, the Scots failed to gain ground. Lot kept shouting encouragement to his men, and he himself fought like a hero. And after a while, the Scottish ranks began to crumble, and soon they were on the run. Scully battled on, but in the end he was killed. Earl Lot took over in Caithness, and this led to trouble with the Scots, who were angry over their defeat. When Earl Lot was in Caithness, Earl Macbeth came north from Scotland with a large army, and they met at Skitton in Caithness. Lot was outnumbered, but fought so well that the Scots had to fall back. The battle was a short one. All the Scots who survived took to flight, most of them wounded. After this battle, Lot went back to the islands. Many of his men were suffering from wounds, and Lot himself had one that led to his death. People thought it a great loss. Okay, so we have this constant incursion into the Orkneys, and they're expanding into the southwest. And so here they are. They consider Caithness part of the Orkney Islands, and they're expanding into the southwest. Caithness is part of the Orkneys. Eventually they incorporate Sutherland, and they keep moving southward and conquering all of this territory. By 900, Harold Fairhair claims control over the Orkneys, the Shetlands, and the Hebrides. He installs the family of Jarl Ragnvald of Moor over them, and Ragnvald's brother Sigurd becomes the first Earl of the Orkneys. And he also begins to attack Scotland. So we have this repeated incursion against Scotland. The Viking conquests of and settlement in the Orkneys, Ireland, and Scotland all happen together, and they're also part of the conquest of England. And at this time, we see the beginning of the extension of the Irish Norse to England. By 900, the Norwegians were well established in Scotland and from Galloway to Moray Firth. From 900 to 915, the Norsemen from Ireland invaded England north of the Wirral, and the Irish Norse Ragnvald conquered York and made himself king in 919. I'm sorry they have all the same names. As sons of Ragnar, they claimed Northumbria, which would have been Old Deira. Now King Edward the Elder of England was recognized as the overlord of the Scots and Ragnvald, Northumbria, and the Norse. So the English kings, who are the descendants of King Alfred, then start to assert their authority over all of the kings going back to the old tradition of having a high king who then takes the allegiance of the lesser kings or the earls. And so this is what they're trying to put in place. In the 920s, the Scots overrun Strathclyde, the Strathclyde Bretons in Scotland, and Ragnvald and Sigtryg Gale are first immersed in Irish affairs. Sigtryg recovers Dublin, and then he slays the High King Njal and the King of Liffey, who are Norsemen. Okay, and so we can see the Strathclyde. Here is Galloway, and so they're conquering, and here are the Strathclyde Scots, so they're conquering all along this coast, and eventually they have all of Northumbria here. In 921, Ragnvald dies and is succeeded by Sigtryg. In 924, Edward the Elder died, and Aethelstan, his son, married his sister to Sigtryg Gale. So even the English king, Aethelstan, and I have that's a typo there, Aethelstan, it's spelled correctly here. This is the correct spelling. Okay, Aethelstan, his son, the son of Edward the Elder, married his sister to Sigtryg Gale, one of the Vikings. But in 925, the following year, Sigtryg died, and he was succeeded by Olaf, his son, by an earlier marriage. By this time, Guthrith is now king of Dublin, and his uncle acts as regent. But King Aethelstan of England is one of the powerhouse rulers of England, and he actually drives Guthrith to Scotland and Olaf to Ireland. So he is in the way of reconquering all of this land and acting as a barrier to these Viking conquests. In 937, he won a huge battle, the Battle of Brunanburh, a very famous battle where a Norse-Celtic confederacy faced Aethelstan, and Aethelstan wins. And now we turn to one of our other sources that's really good for this period, and that is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. And where the Orkney-Yinga saga attacks everything from the point of view of the Vikings, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, of course, and this is one of your optional books, approaches everything from the point of view of the Angles and the Saxons. And so here is a description of the Battle of Brunanburh from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle under the year 937. And so you can actually take the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and you can cross-reference it with the Orkney-Yinga saga and see and try to match what's going on. So here's the description. Here King Aethelstan, leader of warriors, ring-giver of men, and also his brother, the Atheling Edmund, struck lifelong glory in strife round Brunanburh, clove the shield wall, hacked the war lime with hammer's leavings. Edward's offspring, as was natural to them by ancestry, that in frequent conflict they defend land, treasures, and homes against every foe. The antagonists succumbed. The nation of Scots and seamen fell doomed, the field darkened with soldiers' blood. After, in the morning time, the sun, that glorious star, bright candle of God, the Lord eternal, glided over the depths until the noble creature sank to rest. There lay many a soldier of the men of the north, shot over shield, taken by spears. Likewise, Scots also, sated, weary of war all day long, the West Saxons with elite cavalry pressed in the tracks of the hateful nation with mill-sharp blades, severely hacked from behind those who fled battle. The Mercians refused hard hand-play to none of the heroes, who with Olaf over the mingling of waves, doomed in flight, sought out land in the bosom of a ship. 5 young kings lay on the battlefield, put to sleep by swords, likewise also 7 of Olaf's jarls, countless of the raiding army of seamen and Scots. There the ruler of Northmen, compelled by necessity, was put to flight, to ship's prow with a small troop. The boat was pushed afloat, the king withdrew, saved life over the fallow flood. There also likewise the aged Constantine came north to his kith by flight. He's a Scot, Constantine is a Scot. The hoary men of war had no cause to exult in the clash of blades. He was shorn of his kinsmen, deprived of friends, on the meeting place of peoples, cut off in strife, and left his son on the place of slaughter, mangled by wounds, young in battle. The gray-haired warrior, old crafty one, had no cause to boast in that clash of blades. No more had Olaf cause to laugh with the remains of their raiding army, that they were better in works of war on the battlefield, in the conflict of standards, the meeting of spears, the mixing of weapons, the encounter of men, when they played against Edward's sons on the field of slaughter. Then the Northmen, bloody survivors of darts, disgraced in spirit, departed on Ding's Mere, in nailed boats over deep water, to seek out Dublin and their own land again. Likewise the brothers both together, king and atheling, exultant in war, sought Kith, the land of Wessex. They left behind to divide the corpses, to enjoy the carrion, the dusky-coated, horny-beaked black raven, and the gray-coated eagle, white-rumped greedy warhawk, and the wolf, grey beast in the forest. Never yet in this island was there ever a greater slaughter. Now this is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. What does it sound like to you? Did it sound familiar? The way all the sentences were cast and the words that were used?
It sounded like a saga.
It sounded like a Viking saga, like one of those poems that the guys make up, that they burst into song and write a little poem. And this sounds just like it, doesn't it? I mean, it's so similar. And so you can see how similar these cultures are still remaining. Well, Athelstan won. But by 940, Athelstan was now dead, and Olaf of Dublin, with the Norse-Irish, once again returned to York. Athelstan was just kind of a flash in the pan. I mean, he held back the tide of these conquering Norsemen, but when he died, they returned, and they start raiding the Midlands, which means now they take York back again, and they start pushing south into England itself when they're raiding the Midlands. In fact, they took Leicester and Derby and Nottingham and Lincoln. In 942, King, and I think I marked that on this map. No, I didn't. It's the next one. Okay, I'll show you where those locations are. In 942, King Edmund reconquered them all from Olaf, and in 943, King Olaf Sigtryggsson was driven out of York, and Ragnvald became king. But at this point, King Olaf and Ragnvald were baptized by King Edmund of England. In 944, King Edmund drove them both out of York, but by 946, Edmund had died. Now, in 948 to 954, Eric Bloodaxe showed up. Remember who Eric Bloodaxe was? He was one of the kings of Norway. And so he shows up adventuring, and he joins with Olaf Sigtryggsson, and both of them are fighting over York, expelling each other. By 985 to 1014, Earl Sigurd the Stout now rules the Orkneys and controls all of Viking Scotland. Okay, I told you I'd show you where the Vikings were conquering. Here is York. Here is Derby. Here is Lincoln, and here is Leicester. You see where they're getting down into the heart of England. For the second time, they're moving into this. From 995 to 1000, Olaf Tryggvason, King of Norway, looted the British Isles, but he was baptized in the Scillies, and now we're seeing a pattern. The Scillies are the Western Isles, part of the Western Isles. We're seeing another pattern as these Vikings move in. Progressively, all of them are being baptized by the English, who are already converted to Christianity. And so Olaf Tryggvason was baptized. He married Gyda, sister of King Kvaran of Ireland, and he stayed in Dublin for a while. Then he went to the Orkneys, and he joined Earl Sigurd the Stout and forced Sigurd to convert. And Olaf took Sigurd's son as hostage in order to make sure that Sigurd stayed converted. Now the Orkneys were converted, and Sigurd then married the daughter of Malcolm, King of Scots, and their son was Earl Thorfinn, who we then saw here. Sigurd the Stout married the daughter of Malcolm, King of Scots, and their son was Earl Thorfinn, who was so important later on. Okay. 5 years later, Sigurd went to Ireland in support of King Sigtryg Silkbeard. Sorry, they all have the same names. And so here are the Orkneys again. Sigurd then sent Thorfinn to Scotland to be fostered by King Malcolm, and so the Vikings are spreading their customs. Remember that they all send foster sons all the time. Now they're sending a son to be fostered by King Malcolm. And remember we mentioned King Athelstan, and in Egil Saga he fostered. Who did King Athelstan foster? Do you remember from Egil Saga who he fostered? He fostered one of the Jarls who became king of Norway. I can't remember his name either now that I'm bringing him up. But he did foster one of the kings of Norway. And what was it? Hakon the Good, right. It was Hakon the Good. Yeah, he was a Jarl, but Hakon was a Jarl, and I think he became king later on, yeah. And so we see this fostering, this Scandinavian custom being spread to the people that they're conquering. Well, Sigurd and Sigtryg then fought King Brian of Ireland, and Sigurd and Brian were both killed. In 1014, at the Battle of Clontarf, Brian Boru, King of Munster, was killed, as I said, the Brian, King of Ireland. In 1014, King Sigurd and King Broadir of Man were then killed in Dublin. And Somerlidi, Brusi, and Einar took over the earldom of the Orkneys. So here on our chart, we have Sigurd the Stout dying, and here is that middle part I skipped when I did the Orkneys, and here are the brothers who are the brothers of Thorfinn, and they all are becoming earls at this time with the death of Sigurd the Stout in 1014. They divided it between them, and Thorfinn Sigurdsson, only 5, lived with his grandfather Malcolm at that time. And so he was being actually fostered by Malcolm, who was his grandfather. And so he is part Scots, and the Scots are intermarrying, and they're getting involved in the governance of the Orkneys. Malcolm gave Thorfinn Caithness and Sutherland and made him earl. Then Somerlidi died, and when Thorfinn came of age, he claimed his third of the Orkneys. But his brother Einar was a bully and a tyrant, and the farmers rebelled against him. Einar spent most summers plundering in Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. He fought King Conofogar of Ireland at Loch Larna, and Thorfinn's foster father Thorkel then killed Einar. Thorfinn and Brusi then both went to Norway to ask King Olaf for the earldom. Brusi got there first and surrendered the Orkneys to Olaf, and then Olaf forced Thorfinn to become his man. Okay, now we're seeing them turn to the King of Norway, and the King of Norway is taking over the overlordship in a very direct way of the Orkneys. There was much conflict over the ancestral lands and claims of the king as overlord. Malcolm of Scotland died, and his son Karl Hundison became king. That looks like a Viking name to me, interestingly, and I couldn't track it down. But at this point, Thorfinn Sigurdsson began to conquer southward all the way to Fife. He conquered Sutherland, Ross, Duncansby, and Berwick. Meanwhile, Ragnvald Bruseson went to Russia. And by this time, King Canute of England had just died, and he had ruled from 1016 to 1035. And I didn't bring our book on Canute, but you have a whole book on Canute. His son Harold Harefoot inherited in 1037, but he ruled just for 2 years. And this was Canute's son by his Viking wife. Harold Harefoot died in 1040, and here then is a Norman ship crossing the Channel, taking Emma of Normandy, who was the mother of the next king of England, Harold Harthacnut. And so she is going to England to marry the King of England, so we can see that ship. Okay, here is the area we're talking about. Here is Russia, we're even off the map here, but he goes to Russia. Ragnvald Bruce's son goes to Russia and has adventures there. And so here is the Scandinavian world that they're all participating in. Canut's son Harthacnut then became king of both England and Norway, and so his reign was very short, but he ruled both England and Norway as Canute had done, and so we see the beginning of a Norse Sea Empire. Thorfinn was raiding in the Hebrides and various parts of Scotland. Magnus was now king in Norway, the foster brother of Earl Ragnvald, and Olaf the Fat had been the foster father of Magnus. Ragnvald and Thorfinn joined in battle, and now Ragnvald himself died. By this time, the Orkneys were fully Christian. Earl Thorfinn had won for himself 9 Scottish earldoms, the whole of the Hebrides, and a considerable part of Ireland. He traveled to Rome, as we saw, for an audience with the Pope. He met the Emperor Henry III of Germany, where he was greeted with great feasting and rejoicing. What is amazing is how interconnected all the Viking lands were. Ireland and York, Ireland and Scotland, Scotland and England, and all of them were connected to Norway. So we have a vibrant North Sea world where all the Viking lands are connected together, even Normandy, and they're all interacting together, and even with Russia. And we have this vibrant sort of interconnection with all of the Viking northern lands. Okay, we've looked at the British Isles, at the Orkneys, Ireland, and Scotland. Next, we're going to turn to that really important Viking settlement, Iceland, and that's what we'll do next week.